All right. I think we're now live. I want to welcome everybody to another episode, if you will, of Conversations with Cougars. And I've got my classmate and my teammate, number 79, with me. And Keith, I sure appreciate you joining me
Oh
this
yeah,
evening. How are
it's
you doing, my friend?
well, I'm doing great, Bernard. I really appreciate you asking me to participate in this. It ought to be a lot of fun.
I think it will be. And I know you've participated. You've seen some of our prior talks with Coach Parrish, Harry Wayne, Coach Parrish, Josh. Last
Yeah,
week was Chip Harris, who coached after our tenure time there. And then we had Shane Cobb, who was part of the first four teams, the first 4 years at the school. And boy, he
yeah,
shared some great stories. That was fun. Things I didn't know, things maybe neither of us really knew because we were in middle school at the time. But for
right.
those of you who don't know Keith, Keith and I graduated the same year in '86. Keith was a lineman on our team and frankly was one of the heart and souls of that team. Didn't get as much playing time as others, but was every bit as involved. And as a teammate, I'm proud to have shared the field and the team experience with you, Keith. So thank you
Thanks.
for that, and thank you for being my friend all these years.
I've enjoyed it. It's been a
Well,
long time, it hasn't. It's been several years at this point.
it has been. It has
Yeah.
been. Well, before we dig back into the glory days and some fun times back then, tell us a little bit about yourself now. What do you do professionally? Where are you? I assume you're in the Mobile area, but tell
Yeah.
us about your family and what you do for a living.
Okay, sure. Well, I'm a professional educator. I've been a teacher and educator for almost 30 years now. Um, I'm the academic dean at UMS Wright Preparatory School in Mobile. Prior to coming to Mobile, I taught in public schools around Dalton, Georgia. Um, I'm a history teacher, which is what I've always loved. When I was in Dalton, I was the middle school football coach, coached a little bit of baseball, and one year I actually coached wrestling. When I moved to UMS, when I moved to Mobile, um, I actually coached a little bit for, for for Coach Terry Curtis here in Mobile. And like I said, I've been at UMS for 20 years. I've been the academic dean for 12 of those years. I have two sons. My oldest son, John, is a senior. He'll be graduating this year, and he will be attending Mississippi College, where he'll be playing baseball. He's a big
Excellent.
baseball player and football player. And my youngest son, Joseph, is in ninth grade this year, and he too is an athlete. And I will say they both got their athletic talents from their mother because they certainly did not get it from me. Those of you that know me um, will believe that. But obviously I'm a proud dad, and especially the one, well, both of them, but especially John being able to go to college to continue his dream of playing ball. It's been a lot of fun. So my wife and I have been married for 20 years. Kind of a funny story how I ended up in Mobile that I won't bore everyone with the whole story, but basically we met on a blind date at a Mardi Gras ball. And those of you that know anything about Mobile know how big Mardi Gras is here. And we knew each other for several years. I was working on my graduate degree program. She was working on her graduate degree program. And we finally decided to get married and stop driving back and forth. So it's a little bit about me. I'm a pretty simple guy, I guess.
Well, I wouldn't say that, Keith. But what I would say is I know you're proud of both of your boys and your wife and your professional accomplishments. USM Wright is such an outstanding school, and I know you guys have a little bit of a partnership with my children's school, the Altamont School up here.
Right?
That you'll, I guess, trade teachers or you come and observe and
Yeah,
share
yeah.
ideas.
We've gone back and forth and have observed and so forth, and we've gotten some great ideas. Hmm.
Well, very good. I know both schools are very proud of their accomplishments academically as well as athletically. But speaking of that, let's take it back to the early '80s in Dothan. And let's go to junior high, middle school at the time we were coming up. It was
Yeah.
sixth, seventh, and eighth. There were four middle schools, and then Northview began in ninth grade at that time. I'm not sure when they switched over from junior high to middle schools, but I went to Girard, and I always knew I was going to play sports at Northview. And when you were a sixth, seventh, and eighth grader, did you know that sports were going to be part of your high school experience?
You know, I'm not sure that I did. I my family is from Dothan, but when I was very young, we moved to Memphis, Tennessee, and we lived there until the beginning of seventh grade. Now, when I was in Memphis, I played pee wee baseball. I played football for 3 years. In fact, I remember my baseball coach handing me the flyer about the Parkway Village youth football team, and he said, "Keith, you know, this might be a better sport for you than baseball."
Mm-hmm.
And he was right. It was a better sport. But we moved to Dothan, and of course, I left a lot of friends behind and so forth. And I attended Honeysuckle Middle School. And truthfully, you know, I for whatever reason, I guess feeling sorry for myself, whatever, I'd hurt my knee a little bit. You know, I went out. I was going to play seventh grade football at Honeysuckle, and then just kind of got out of it. I ended up not playing in seventh and eighth grade after having played for probably 4 years, you know, when I was in Memphis. But I remember the day that we visited Northview, I think on an orientation trip or at some point. And anyway, I remember listening to Coach Parrish. And I remember, you know, hearing about the fact that, you know, I knew that Northview had won that 81 championship, and I'd been a part of that, and that had kind of got my juices flowing again, I guess, to play football. And then I listened to Coach Parrish talking about setting goals and the fact that if we set that goal, that we could achieve that goal. So all the way back in eighth grade, the goal of winning that state championship was something that was very important to me. It's hard to explain. You were there, you know how it was, and so forth. And, you know, I was, as Bernard has been very kind in saying that I was the heart of the team, and I certainly feel like I was an important part of it. But the reality is that I was certainly not one that got a whole lot of playing time. Though my senior year, I did play in every single, you know, got some time on the field. But it was something I had to work very hard for, I guess you would say. You know, but that was what Coach Parrish and the other coaches taught us. They taught us that work ethic. They taught us, you know, to set goals. They taught us that we could achieve those goals. I went back the other day and I was looking at our ninth grade composite picture. I think we had 50 something kids on that ninth grade football team, 50 something kids. And if I recall correctly, we ended up with a 4-5 season, Bernard.
Something close to that. Something close in that.
Yeah. And I remember, you know, that it came down to that last game of the season, it seems like. And, you know, we didn't have what we had thought was going to be the greatest, most spectacular, successful season. But at the same time, I think that we all grew. You know, Rick Cleveland was our head coach back then. And I'll talk a little bit about Rick in just a minute. But you know, that was tough. Some of us didn't make it to the 10th grade. Some of us did. Yeah. And we continued that work. So I'm rambling a little bit, but it is, you know, your question about middle school, I guess I took a little bit different route. I've always loved sports. I'm still a sports fanatic. Again, not very talented athletically, but you don't have to be in order to love sports and to love the games. And, you know,
Keith, that's what the passion, and when I mean by to me, the heart of our team back then, it was the passion of being a teammate. It was the passion of supporting all the other teammates around you, even when craziness was going on with all those overtimes and heartbreaking losses. But if you remember 10th and 11th grade, I think this is right. We only lost one game in those next 2 years in JV. And
That's
then
right.
some of us, we got to play a little bit into our junior year for the varsity. And then by the time we came around our senior year, we thought going into the season we were world beaters. But that parachute quickly fell to the ground the first game. The first few games didn't exactly go our way. But I want to take you into the junior spring. We have our spring training as we always did, which was terrible. Then we're released, so to speak, into the summer and had a lot of expectations and responsibilities that summer before we reported to camp in August. Do you remember that time period and getting ready for our senior year and some of anything that kind of percolates from there from a memory standpoint? Because I have lots of vivid memories of that time.
Yeah. Bernard, I do, but I don't, they're not as vivid. I mean, I have to say, I remember the hard work we put in. I remember the weight room. I remember the running. I remember the preparation and so forth for that. It was a lot different then than it is now.
Oh,
These
way
kids
different.
today,
Way
I mean,
different.
it is, we thought that it was a full-time thing back in those days, but with the weight training and with the running and the conditioning, but now with organized 7-on-7, and they even have organized line drills and so forth. It's a lot different situation. Plus, the game is a lot different today.
Yeah.
For those of you out there that don't know, when Bernard and I first started, we were running the wishbone, or Bernard was running the wishbone, and I was trying to block in the wishbone.
Wait, let me pause you. I was tasked with running the wishbone, but as Coach Parrish now has publicly finally admitted, there was a reason why we got away from the wishbone. And it wasn't because of any skills that I had that were for that type of offense. Let's be clear about that.
Yeah. And the thing was, actually, in some ways, the wishbone suited me a little bit better because as an offensive lineman, I could come off, hold that block for a few minutes or for a few seconds and then move along. But, with our switch to the run and shoot, then that was a whole different thing. Yeah. I mean, that was what was asked of the linemen doing reach blocks and so forth was a lot different even than what we had done in the past.
Vastly different. Vastly different.
Yeah. I mean, it was for those days, it was, I don't know, there weren't very many schools. I guess Houston was running it. And a few other people were running.
Well, we got it from we got it from the Gamblers out in the USFL. But you're right, most of the southeast part of the state, probably most of the state, was still largely running the ball. Throwing the ball was, it's, I guess what Alabama did kind of influenced a lot of that, what Auburn was doing. And maybe that was, unless you were out west in college, the BYUs of the world, not many schools in the 80s were throwing the ball, particularly in high school in Alabama. But Keith, I can vividly remember that those training days in that summer of us going into our fall of our senior year.
It was hot.
The camaraderie, it was brutally hot. But the camaraderie, because there were so many of us who were there every day that we needed and should have been there, and even times when we shouldn't have been. But then we go into the first game against Lee, and I know you remember this. Our first 3 games, due to weather and other circumstances, we had 3 games in less than 2 weeks.
Yep.
You remember we played our first 2 games in the first week, a Monday and a Thursday.
The first game of the season was on Labor Day. And it was because there was I can't remember the hurricane, but there was a hurricane in the Gulf that had gone to the west, and they thought they had canceled the games on Friday, and then they had allowed us to play. And lo and behold, that storm started back our direction, back to the east. And so we played that game. Then we played that game on I guess, that Friday night, and then the next Thursday.
That's right.
So,
you're right.
It was just bang, bang, bang. And we didn't fare all that well in those games, as I recall.
Yeah, if you remember, Lawrence got hurt in the first quarter.
Lawrence got hurt second play of the game, something like that. Yep,
and we lost him for about 4 games. Mm-hmm. And I'm pulling up the season. We we obviously we lost to Lee 14-8 in the what I'll call the Hurricane Monday game. Then we
Well,
took care. There you go. There you go. Then we
yeah,
took care of Kendrick.
I have my poster from that year
Yeah.
still.
Yep. And
We lost to Lee 8-14, and we beat Kendrick. We defeated Kendrick,
yeah.
24-7, and then we lost to Lanier 9-14.
We never could beat Lanier.
Yeah, Lanier was they were kind of our nemesis, and I remember going into that Crampton Bowl locker room too. I sure hope it's better than it was at that time. I think it is.
I think they've redone that whole complex. But
yeah, they have.
Keith, that our next game, the fourth game of the year, we lost in overtime to Choctawhatchee, and we were in overtime, and I think on 2 successive plays we tried to quarterback sneak, and I couldn't get in either time. And in hindsight, we should have gone around the end with one of the faster backs or thrown the ball, but it is what it is. But our season turned around. Lawrence came back for homecoming the next game against Central Thomasville. And that was a big win. We were up 23-0 and coasted to the win. And then all those overtimes started.
Yeah.
Remember,
I'm not sure, but I think that we still hold the AHSAA record for the number of overtime games in a season.
I don't know how you have more than 5 in a year. It's crazy.
Yeah.
But if you remember, we beat Enterprise finally. Then we always had Foley's number. If you go back and look at the history of Northview versus Foley, we always beat them late in the fourth quarter, including 3 straight years. We beat them for their homecoming our junior year. Yeah. We beat them at the end of our game senior year, and then the next year that we went back there and beat them again late in the game. Yeah. So I don't know if Foley kept scheduling us or not, but I suspect they didn't want to see much of us. But talk to me about this. And you were one of the offensive linemen, and you got to play sparingly, but you're standing and you're with the O-line and with who was your head coach or who was your position coach during that senior year?
Well, Coach Sellers was the head coach that year. Coach Sellers had come in, and I remember him staying on us. I remember, I was talking about the reach blocks, just constantly working to try to reach. Come on, Rice, let's go. Use them timbers. That would be the thing we would always hear. Throw those legs up again. I mean, things that today are absolutely illegal. We'll get you 15-yard penalties all day long.
Yeah.
Were perfectly legal back then. Perfectly legal. And, I remember, I think it was that year. It was either our junior year or our senior year, but I'm pretty certain it was the senior year, was the year they changed the rule on offensive linemen being allowed to use their hands. I think I'm almost positive that was the year it was. I remember it was either junior or senior, and I think it was senior year. And so, that kind of was something a little bit different because you learned how to get up in, you learned how to kind of get a hold of those guys, something that in the past you would have quickly gotten a penalty for holding, but the rules changed. Today you see offensive linemen using their hands, and it's just a much different game than it was. But Coach Sellers was one that I guess he had some patience for me. I'm not sure, and he had patience for us. But at the same time, I do know that we worked awfully hard. And
you did,
yeah.
And it never really showed ever. That frustration never, for the lack of playing time, never really was ever there. And frankly, for everybody else on the line, I know they appreciated the enthusiasm, they appreciated the sportsmanship, the good teammates they were, as well as Tommy Dixon, Charles Bunton. I'm just trying to think of some of the other guys who filled in from time to time. But talk to me about some of your mindset, because it was a long season. It's our senior year. None of us know where we're going to school that first semester of the year. We're trying to soak it all in. You're seniors, but we're sitting at 1-3. We're all frustrated as heck. Lawrence, our best guy, is out, but then he comes back for homecoming, and at least in my mind's eye, things just kind of turned that night at Rip Hughes.
Well, it did, but I'm going to go back even before that. I remember conversation, I guess it was after I guess it was after the league game. I don't remember exactly, but I remember we had a senior meeting. And I remember, the coaches talking with us and us going around the room. And I remember Coach Bubba Johnson saying something to me about you need to stop feeling sorry for yourself. You need to have more confidence. You are an important part of this team. And I guess, 30 something years ago, that still stuck with me. And so that was what was always the important thing, was being a part of that team. How could you contribute, whether it was firing off the line and blocking someone, whether it was playing on special teams as I did. I played a tackle on the extra point field goal team. Whether it was standing on the sidelines, Coach Parrish, I remember, we always were making noise. We were clapping. We were supporting the other players. Then you come to that, like you said, after that third game, and certainly there was consternation. There was concern. We were worried about what was going to happen. But you know what? I still remember that conversation that Coach Parrish had with us years and years before. And I remember the thing that he told us was, you set goals, you work toward them, and good things are going to happen. And for whatever reason, I guess I didn't give up. And, I'm hard-headed, I suppose. But that was one of the things. I remember that okay, we're just going to have to deal with this. We're going to have to take one game at a time. The Enterprise game, we beat Enterprise finally that year. But you remember we went to double overtime, and not the only reason we won, but we won as a result of Enterprise. They decided to go for two on their second possession of overtime. Had they gotten that, we would not have even been in the playoffs.
No.
Yeah, we wouldn't have even made the playoffs that year. But it was just little things. And that goes to show you how important every one of those plays was. It was certainly an experience having so much adversity. And everyone called us the cardiac Cougars because we were giving everybody heart attacks. And we were playing until the end, but we never quit. Even those games that we didn't win, we didn't quit.
The games that we did lose, we only lost by 6, 5, 3, and 7.
Yeah.
And after the win for homecoming, the Central of Thomasville, we won 10 of 11. And frankly, again, the stars just lined up for us to lose to Dothan.
Right.
So they had to play Bo Peep in
Exactly.
Central of Phoenix City. He gets hurt in that game, doesn't play against us in the second round. But frankly, with us being the last place team in 6A to make the playoffs, and then having to go to Opelika and upsetting those guys.
Yeah, they didn't expect that. They didn't expect
No one did. No one did. Coach Parrish famously tells when they all go to the coaches meeting to talk about the pairings, and you're supposed to stand up and say who you are and your team, that Opelika's behind him because of, I guess, alphabetical order. They chuckle when Coach Parrish announces his name, team, and 6-4 ranking. 6-4 record. Well, we got the last laugh, but I will tell you, coming through the playoffs, and by the time we got to the state game, and that's where I want to go with, by the time we got to the state game, we'd been through so much. In that first half, granted, they score first, but then AOK takes it 90-plus yards on that return fumble. That really turned it. And by the time it was halftime, we're up 25-7, I think, at half.
Something like that, yeah.
And so the second half, we didn't know how to let our hair down a little bit. We hadn't been in that position all year.
Exactly. We had not been in a position where we were able to basically just control the ball and burn out the clock, essentially. And, that was it really was. I remember the week before the Fairhope game, semifinals of state, we go to extra, we go to overtime. And I remember, as I said, I was one of my things that I did get to do was play on that extra point field goal team. And I remember I got overloaded, and I'm thinking, oh gosh, what I got to stop these guys. They cannot get through. And I remember just being covered and getting up and looking to find an official, and he has his hands up. And I'm like, we're going to state.
I don't
But
know if you remember this, but Leon Lett, who later played in the pros, was on that team. And I'd be willing to bet you he was somewhere on that line, whether he was across from you or someone else, I don't know. But he was a man. He was a terror because I knew where he was every time we snapped the ball. I had to know where he was.
Well,
but you're right.
And if they had done their work looking at film, they probably did say that's where we want to line up.
Well, I don't know about that, Keith.
But
talk to me about the night before the state game. Not a lot of guys in Northview history have that experience about what it feels like the night before the state game. Do you remember who you roomed with?
I roomed with Patrick Fitch. I remember I was with Patrick that night. Yeah.
You remember us going to the movies out in Hoover?
We went to see Rocky, and I remember, it was pretty exciting. I remember I guess it was the Tuesday before that when Coach Parrish took us up to Legion Field to practice because, today turf fields are not that uncommon, but back in those days, it was something to be able to play on, and that turf was really hard, and it was really, it was different. And us going up there, and a funny thing is I remember that we stopped, I guess, in Hoover for lunch. And I remember us hitting the pizza bar at one of the pizza joints. And I remember the whole offensive line was there thinking, well, these people aren't going to make any money today. But, that was funny. And then, but yeah, that night before, and I remember, we got serious. We got serious about it. And, it was so cool because back in those days, only the highest classification, which we were 6A, played at Legion Field. Today they have this great thing, the Super 7, where, all of these kids get to experience going back and forth between Bryant Denny and Jordan Hare and so forth. And, that's a great thing. But for us, back in the day when Alabama was still playing there, I think the Alabama-Auburn game, the Iron Bowl, had been the week before.
That's the Van Tiffin famous long field goal game.
Yeah. And, I remember that. I remember it seems like on that Tuesday they were still cleaning the stadium.
Yep, they sure were.
So I recall that. I remember, how just looking around, and we were just, at least I was kind of in awe of what we saw there, because this was a place that I guess I'd always dreamed of playing there at some point, and that dream came true.
Keith, I remember that Tuesday of us actually walking on the turf and getting some work in. And I had been fortunate enough to have attended Alabama games there. I actually went to, I can't remember, it was a high school game there with my cousin and uncle. Anyway, I just remember thinking, man, I was sitting in those seats earlier this week, or just 3 days ago for the Alabama-Auburn game, but now here I am on this turf. And yeah, it was pretty awesome. We were on an artificial surface, getting to play. We had never done that. But in hindsight, that was such a horrible surface to play on.
Oh, yeah.
It was like a parking lot with a little rug over it. It was terrible. Yeah. But that's what it was at the time.
Yep. I remember the carpet burns and the warnings about carpet burns and so forth. Yeah.
I will tell you this, and this is one of the tributes to the coaches and just how prepared we were by that time. By the time we stepped on the field for the game on that Saturday, I really didn't have much nerves. At that point, and I bet you if you ask several of the others from our class or who got to play some in that game, we were pretty collected by then. At least maybe on the outside I might have shown that more than I might have. But by that point, we knew what we wanted to do and needed to do. We just didn't know if Huffman, which had knocked off the number 2 team in the country, J.O. Johnson out of Huntsville the week before, if they had faced much passing, much less what we were doing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But Bernard, again, I go back to, and this may sound silly, it may sound, I don't know, it may sound like a dream, a fairy tale, whatever, but I remember the discussion. I remember the promises that Coach Parrish had made. Work hard and good things happen. And then on top of that, like you've talked about and like we've talked about, man, we had to fight and scratch to get there. But we lost some games along the way. We lost some battles, but we were winning the war. And at the time that we made it to Legion Field, it was just, yeah, they had beat J.O. Johnson. They had to be good. But we were the Northview Cougars. We had survived 5 overtimes, and we hadn't won every one of them, but we had played 5 overtimes. We were the Cardiac Cougars. And, I just think we all had an expectation that we're going to win this ball game. We're going to win. And at least that's the way I felt.
Keith, there's so many from that experience of playing at Northview, just playing high school sports. There's so many life lessons in there. We could talk forever, but I want to ask you, what are some of those life lessons that you took after high school? I know you went undergrad to Montevallo, and now you've had a very successful academic career, and you've brought your 2 boys coming up through the high school system with playing sports.
Yeah.
There's got to be life lessons in there that I know you've leaned on from time to time, or that you shared with your students at school or with your sons. And I want to just kind of pick your brain a little bit to see where that's come in for you.
There's several things there. Obviously, setting goals is very important. We set that goal very early, and you've got to do that in life, in your career, everywhere. You have to set the goals. You have to learn the work ethic. We didn't just luck into winning those games. We didn't just luck into the playoffs. We worked really, really hard. I remember, and I don't remember, I think it was either pre-season before junior year or senior year. Well, let me go back and tell another story. I do remember in 11th grade, it was, I think, probably the first week of practice. And I remember, again, just this is hot and it's tired and I'm tired and I'm not going to play a lot and I'm worn out and this and that. And I remember there was one afternoon practice, I didn't show up. And I had said, I just don't know. I just don't know if I'm going to do this anymore. Maybe it's just time to quit. And something kept coming back to me that Coach Parrish had always preached about, if you quit at this, you're going to quit on your family, you're going to quit on your kids, you're going to quit on everyone else. And I reconsidered it, thought about it, and I remember calling Coach Parrish and saying, Coach Parrish, I wasn't at practice today. And he didn't yell and jump and scream. He said, I know, Keith, I saw that you weren't there. He said, be here tomorrow. And I was. Now I had to roll. And back in those days,
that was so awful. Oh, that was so awful.
Back in those days, we lined up horizontally to the goal and rolled over and over and over all the way down the field. It's not quite like my.
You're wearing your full pads and you're wearing your helmet.
Yep. And it's hot and it's dirty and it's nasty and and I remember doing that, but after I did that, it was over. Now, I did not get my Ironman award that year. I remember one of the coaches saying, now, you hadn't missed any practices, have you, Keith? And I remember saying, no, I did miss that one. And back in those days, I don't know if they continued that tradition, but we would receive an Ironman award if we were at every practice. You received the Super Ironman award if you were able to practice every time. So, if you were injured and had to sit on the sidelines for a little while, then you might get the Ironman as opposed to the Super Ironman, which, I got the Ironman both of the sophomore and senior years. But
and that award was a big, big deal back in the day.
It was. I remember even, as a young coach, as a young middle school coach, I remember taking that to my kids that I coached in Georgia. I digress a little bit just to move a little ahead. I was very fortunate that the first 2 years out of Northview, I actually did attend Wallace. I went to Wallace College for a couple of years and became very active there and was very fortunate. As you said, I ended up going to the University of Montevallo and had a presidential leadership scholarship and so forth. But anyway, during that time, I actually went back to Northview, and Coach Parrish was able to use me as a community coach. So that was kind of a neat thing.
Oh, very cool. I did not
They,
appreciate that.
yeah, yeah. It was I primarily worked with the ninth graders, but I was there on Friday nights and so forth, and so I got to remain a part of that, and so I got to continue to learn from that coaching staff. Now, as I said, I coached primarily middle school over the years. There's a little bit with the high school I've helped and so forth, but that was a big thing. Anyway, as you said, those awards, those kind of things, that was something I tried to instill in my players. You don't quit. You set goals. You don't quit, and you work to the end. Those are things that I've tried to instill in students, players, my own kids, who again I'm really proud of. They've been pretty successful in high school.
Well, guys, if you're just joining us or if you watch us on replay, I'm talking with my teammate, my classmate, number 79, Keith Rice. Keith is in Mobile, and we're taking a trip down memory lane, and you're doing a beautiful job of sharing with us some of those life lessons.
Yeah.
And Keith, before we're getting close to the end of our discussion, and I sure appreciate you sharing some of these things, and I'm going to put you on the hot seat for just a minute, because I know this is going to bring a smile to your face, because I know that your days as a Cougar back in the day were very memorable and very important to you, and as they are now and have been for many, many years. But not many people do what you did. Not many people are moved as much as you were moved. Yeah. So I want you to share with us in closing what that practice field, what you did on that practice field later on.
We spent a whole lot of time on that practice field, and we learned an awful lot of lessons. As I mentioned a moment ago, one of the biggest lessons was you don't quit, because if you quit here, you're going to quit on your family. You've got to be a provider. You've got to take care of them. And, it was an important part of my life. As I'd said, I had earlier in the conversation, I'd moved back to Dothan. It was a tough time. The football team became my family. You guys were my family. We're still friends today. We don't get to see each other very often, but we enjoy it when we do. So when the time came for my wife and I, we had been dating for a little while, and I had taken her to Dothan. She had not even met my mother and my father. At the time, my father's deceased now, but at the time she had not met them. So we just were tooling around and so forth. Well, what she didn't know was that I had an engagement ring in my pocket, and I said, well, I want to take you out and show you where I went to school, and let's just kind of walk out here. And so I did something pretty stupid, pretty corny, but it is a special thing. We walked out to the 50-yard line, and I got down on my knee and proposed to my wife. And she was kind of expecting the proposal. She certainly was not expecting it on the 50-yard line of the Northview Cougar practice field. But as corny as it may sound, I learned so many lessons on that field that were so valuable and so important that there was an obvious physical connection for me between that part of my life and when my wife and I were engaged and married. I'll tell you this, I on a regular basis, until she and I got married, I wore my state championship ring. I'll still get it out and wear it every now and then. It doesn't fit very well anymore because
me neither.
But I will still wear it occasionally. And that's one of my absolute prized possessions to this day. And anyway, it's a crazy story. Now remember, as I said, my now fiance had not even met my mother and my father and my grandmother. So we walk That's another story. My mom likes my wife better than me now anyway. So,
Uh-oh.
it's all great. But, it was just kind of it was just an important thing to me. It was very symbolic,
Oh,
very
Keith,
symbolic.
it's a fantastic story. And it's not corny one bit. I love the story. I'm glad you shared it with us. I'm glad that you were not too nervous to be able to pull it off
Yeah.
because it's not something that you do every day. And most importantly, I'm glad she said yes.
Yeah. Well, I am too, because she obviously didn't know what she was getting into with me, but I'm happy for that.
Well, it sounds like that everything has worked out just great. Keith, I can't thank you enough for your time and this trip down memory lane. It's just been awesome for me. I hope it's been memorable and okay for you as well.
It's been a blast, Bernard. I just, that time in my life is so important, so vital. And, you know, it, it, it goes without expression. And the fact that I've been able to share that with my boys, and I've seen them develop, as I said, much better athletes than I ever was. And it's just, that's my joy now, is watching them play and you know, being successful in what they're doing as well.
Well, and they're getting the benefit of some of your life lessons. Now, whether they actually listen as teenagers anymore, that remains, we know how that goes. But
Right.
they're
But
hearing
they
you.
will.
They're
Yeah.
hearing you. That's sinking in. But my friend, thank you for contributing what you've been on our Facebook group here. This has been a lot of fun for me, just seeing all the comments and pictures and stuff. And I'm about to start putting the games from our senior year and putting them on YouTube, and I'll slowly start putting them in our group for everybody to enjoy. But thank you again, Keith. I sure appreciate it.
I enjoyed it, Bernard. Look forward to seeing you soon.
Well, guys, this will be another episode concluding of the great discussion with my buddy Keith Rice. Our conversations with Cougars will keep going. I'm not sure who we got next, but just be on the lookout on the page. I'll keep posting them, and we'll keep doing them. You guys have a good evening.